Moving on into chapter 4, from the word of the law to the interpretation, President Kennedy attempts to put the CIA under control. Besides the towering mountains, the field looked more like pasture land than a hidden airfield. As a result, it was not surprising to see mud-covered water buffalo gazing in a shade beneath the wing of the old World War II B-17 Flying Fortress. Low rambling sheds, some of them stables and others supply shelters, were scattered along the perimeter of the field. A full stand of grass and small underbrush had grown up through the mesh of the pierced steel plank that laid on the ground to form a parking ramp for a collection of clandestine aircraft. Coils of barbed wire had spread everywhere in a clearly concealed random pattern, with wildflowers growing through it in abundance. Yet for all its appearance of tranquility, this remote airfield was the center of a most active clandestine air activity. The pastoral scene camouflaged the muted industry of teams of Chinese nationalist specialists who prepared the B-17s for deep flights over the mainland. Agent information told of trouble deep in China that was being exploited by leaflet drops from the old bombers. Skilled crews who flew low to use the terrain as cover from radar pinpointed the trouble cities on each flight because they were natives of the area. Upon return, one crew reported the city ringed with searchlights, probing for the plane through the murky sky. The pilot had dropped through the clouds and actually flown the B-17 in a tight circle inside the ring of searchlights, right over the heart of the ancient city, spraying leaflets all the time. As soon as the leaflet cargo had been dropped, he brought the plane down into the dark path of the river and flew a treetop level back to the seacoast. One morning, just after the sun had burst above the eastern peaks of Formosa, I saw 2 of these aircrafts drop into the pasture for a safe landing after an all-night mission. As they taxied to a halt on a steel plank, the Chinese ground crews swarmed around the planes, thrilled at the return of the crews and the success of the night, and eager to hear how everything had gone. Then I noticed a few American technicians systematically removing tape and film canisters and other specialized equipment from the planes to the laboratory for development and processing. I couldn't help but ponder the significance of these flights upon these 2 professional groups and the meaning of the word clandestine, as well as the nature of the policy that accounted for these flights. This is a serious one. They all are, but this one, To these Chinese, the flights were returned to the homeland. They were probes of the remaining weak spots of the Chinese Communist shield. They were a serious attempt designed to arouse mainland Chinese to demonstrate that the old regime still cared and that the Western world was still with them. For the Americans, these flights were entirely different. I had traveled to Taiwan with a CIA careerman after having completed 8 months of concentrated staff work devising and designing an elaborate logistical system for special operations work all over the world. We had flown to Taiwan to see some of the field operations that were supported by the system. As I watched these 2 distinct elements work, supporting the same mission from the same base, I saw at first hand a truth that had not been evident back in the Pentagon. The Chinese were very proud of these flights and their part in doing something for their own people. To the Americans, this was just a job, and it was one in which they could not become identified. If a mission failed, as some did, and the crew and the plane were lost, the Chinese nationalists would honor their gallant men. If a mission were lost, the Americans would have to ignore it and deny that they had played any part in the operation at all. In that sense, warfare was honorable and part of an ancient and respected tradition. On the other hand, clandestine warfare is never honorable and must always be denied. With this in mind, why were Americans themselves involved in these operations and others like them all around the world? The answer is complex. The more intimate one becomes with this activity, the more one begins to realize that such operations are rarely, if ever, initiated from an intent to become involved in pursuit of some national objective in the first place. It could be hard to find an example of a clandestine operation that had been developed from the beginning solely in support of some significant national objective. The lure of fun and games is addictive and at most powerful. There would be no intelligence problems at any level within the community if it were not for the inevitability of the desire to divert the intelligence operations into secret operations. There would be little complaint and few problems if the CIA was limited to include secret intelligence and no more. In this day of 3-dimensional capability with electronic snoopers and satellites, there is no place to hide anyhow, and concealment and secrecy are time-limited devices at best. It used to be that if a nation defended its borders and saw to it that no one entered its territory, it could be secret its actions, its maneuvers, and its intentions. It was the secret development of the simple iron ramrod that gave the armies of Frederick the Great of Prussia such a predominant margin of superiority in battle. Today, such singular and distinct advances might occur as with the atom bomb, but the secret, if it is a secret at all, cannot be kept. There's no way to hide it and no place to hide. High-flying aircraft and satellite observations platforms provide us with accurate photographic information sufficient to identify and distinguish such an object as a round card table from a square card table. Special sensors give evidence of crop yields, thermal output variations, and many other areas of information. Nuclear weapons plants can be observed on a regular schedule and activity gauged quite accurately by several methods. Various electronic and communications monitors provide much more valuable information that even the satellites cannot get. Sophisticated economic studies provide volumes of essential and very precise information that cannot be hidden except at great cost and inconvenience. The very fact that modern industrial production methods require numbering, marketing, and serial coding of products and parts manufactured plays directly into the hands of the vigilant intelligence operator. There can be a few secrets, and even those become fewer as soon as a little time is involved. A good secret will last only a short time at best. Even the secret of the atom bomb and its delivery system was more than 50% compromised once the bomb had burst over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As Norbert Wiener said in his book, The Human Use of Human Beings, when we consider a problem of nature such as that of atomic reactions and atomic explosions, the largest single item of information which we can make public is that they exist. Once a scientist attacks a problem which he knows to have an answer, his entire attitude is changed. He is already some 50% of his way toward the answer, and of more particular relevancy to the field of intelligence is another quote from Wiener. The most important information which we can possess is the knowledge that the message which we are reading is not gibberish. In this context, he is talking about the problem of code breakers, but this is also applied to many other areas of interest involving data acquired from the numberless sources in tremendous quantities. The responsibility lies heavily upon the intelligence system itself to assure that it had been able to separate the wheat from the chaff, which they are not able to do. I'm like 10 million times smarter than all of those agents put together. They can't wrap their head around what's actually going on. Data may not be gibberish as it comes in, but if it is not processed and evaluated properly, it may be useless when it comes out. It is always of paramount importance to know that the information we have is not planted, false, or product of deception. So even the quest for secret intelligence may not exist as a major requirement to the extent that the CIA purists would like to make it seem. But this is not the real problem. The real problem is with clandestine operations in peacetime that have been mounted in response to intelligence data inputs that might have been deceptive or misinterpreted in the first place. During World War II, there were reasons for clandestine operations, and much essential information was obtained by such means. However, as many students and researchers in this area have discovered, the value of such clandestine means with relativity small. Go away. You're an ass. As soon as this is like little boy syndrome. As soon as World War II was over, President Truman dissolved the OSS to assure the clandestine operations would cease immediately. 6 months later, when he founded the Central Intelligence Group, he expressly denied a covert role for the authority and restricted the DCI to a coordinating function. During the debates leading up to the passage of the National Security Act of 1947, proponents of a clandestine role for the CIA were repeatedly outmaneuvered and outvoted in Congress. In his book, Secret War, Sanchez de Gramont reports the NSA 47 replaced the CIG with the CIA, a far more powerful body. From the hearings in the NSA 47, it is evidence that no one knew exactly what the nature of the beast would be, and I feel sick to my stomach. At that time, a member of the House of Representatives, Representative Fred Busby, made the prophetic and quite accurate remark, "I wonder if there is any foundation for the rumors that have come to me to this effect." Yeah, that through this CIA that are contemplating operational activities, that congressman knew what he was talking about. And as we look back upon a quarter century of the CIA, it seems hard to believe that he wasn't sure that was exactly what they were up to in the first place. When the law was passed, it contained no provision whatsoever either for collection of intelligence or for clandestine activities. However, it did contain one clause that left the door ajar for later interpretation and exploitation. The CIA was created by the NSA 47 and placed under direction of the NSC, a committee. This same act had established the NSC at the same time. Therefore, the CIA's position relative to the NSC was without practice and precedent. But the law was specific in placing the agency under the direction of that committee and is not placing the agency in the office of the president and directly under his control. In conclusion, this act provided that among the duties the CIA would perform, it would perform such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the NSC may from time to time direct. This was the inevitable loophole, and as time passed, and as the CIA and the ST grew in power and know-how, they tested this clause in the act and began to practice their own interpretation of its meaning. They believed that it meant that they could practice clandestine operations they preserved paid off. Their perseverance paid off. During the summer of 1948, the NSC issued a directive number 10-2, which authorized special operations with stipulations. Such operations must be secret. Such operations must be plausibly deniable. These were important prerequisites. The CIA really worked at the achievement of this goal toward unlimited, unrestrained covert operations. In this early years, the directors, Admiral Sowers and General Smith, were preoccupied with the task of getting the agency organized, with beating down the traditional opposition of the older members of the community, and with performing their primary function, that of coordinating national intelligence. However, with the advent of the Allen Dulles era, ever increasing pressure was placed on the restraints that bound covert operations. Dulles succeeded in freeing the agency from these fetters to such an extent that 5 years after this departing from the agency, the retiring DCA Admiral Reborn was so conditioned to the CIA party line that he could not quote the law correctly. In reply to a question put to him by the U.S. News and World Report in July 18, 1966, asking what was the specific charter of the CIA, he said, "To perform such other services as the NSC may direct. The fifth assignment is the agency's charter for clandestine activities. This is a very small deviation from the exact language of the law, but it's fundamental, and it shows how the agency and even its DCI in 1966 believed and wanted others to believe that the NSA 47 did it, in fact, give the CIA a clandestine activities charter, whereas it did not. The act carefully stipulated that the CIA would and could perform such other activities as the NSC would from time to time direct. That time to time stipulation clearly limits the agency's other services to intermittent matters and does not give the agency any clear authority to perform clandestine activities. As a matter of fact, many other actions, as we shall see, took place to prevent the agency from getting any such automatic and routine authority." Another statement of Admiral Reborn is equally slanted. In response to a question about clandestine activity, he states that the agency must have the prior approval in detail of a committee of the NSC before it can carry out such activity. Again, there is but a shading of the language of the law, but again, it is most fundamental, and the law says that the agency is under the direction of the NSC in terms of how the agency should, in accordance with the law, become involved in clandestine activity. The law follows its from time to time stipulation by saying that the agency will perform such activity by direction of the NSC. There is a distinct difference between winning approval of something and doing it by direction of the NSC. The distinction is in the area of the origin of the idea. The laws sees the NSC as responsible for the origination of the idea and then for the direction of the agency. The agency sees this as being something that it originates ostensibly through its intelligence sources and then takes to NSC for approval. This was not contemplated by the law. Furthermore, the law did not authorize the creation of a committee of NSC for such important matters. It was intent of the Congress that the NSC itself direct such things. It should be noted also that Admiral Rawborn got carried away in his interview with another statement. In response to that question, would the U.S. ambassador in the country concerned about that's someone trying to step in and stop the flow, the vinyasa. In response to the question, would the U.S. ambassador in the country concerned know about your activities there, Rawborn replied, CIA's overseas personnel are subordinate to the U.S. ambassadors. We operate with the foreknowledge and approval of the ambassador. The reader may have his choice, including the Admiral Rawborn either made an untrue statement or that he did not know how his clandestine services operated. I choose to believe the latter. Me too. In either case, there are countless instances in which the ambassador does not know what the CIA is doing. Kenneth Galbraith's Ambassador's Journal is all anyone needs to read to see that. Or would someone like to say the Ambassador Keating in India knew what Henry Kissinger and his agency friends were doing in Pakistan and India during the December 1971 conflict? Another case would be that of Ambassador Timberlake in the Congo. I'm having a miniature conversation here for just a moment, if you don't mind. It would be unthinkable that the DCI, in this case, Admiral Rawborn, would intentionally make untrue statements in a national publication such as the U.S. and World Report. The least he could have done would have been to avoid the question entirely. The deeper meaning of this interview is that Admiral Rawborn, after more than a year of duty as DCI, simply did not know how his operating agents worked. He thought he had a clear ticket for clandestine operations, and he thought that the arrangements were such that the ambassadors would know about the actions of the CIA's clandestine operators. This is a clear example of how far the agency has gone in getting around the law and in creating its own inertial drift, which puts it into things almost by an intelligence input-induced automation system. Wait until you see how many more videos I can create in one day with vast knowledge. I currently am going to be completing this book, and then I'll move on to other works. Without the knowledge of its own leaders, and certainly without the knowledge of most higher level authorities. I've already done the studying, and I'm also a channel for God. So God is going to be delivering the messages via this page. Not to mention, I have factual information of learned lessons, as in you see the books behind me. Meaning, the art of war, no one's teaching. Meaning someone has to carry on the legacy of teaching, not create new crap. It's been defined and studied that the art of war is a fabulous way to strategize and prevent the action of war. We're currently rising up to the surface, honesties and truths, so we can repair ourselves from the past, so that we can recreate ourselves into forgiveness and compassion for those who deserve it. And then we'll strategize and strategically place armies at hand where they need to be to destroy the evils who are attempting to take down peace on earth, which is literally in this book to tell you that our own CIA agency are a bunch of a-holes who are literally out to play cowboys and Indians on the souls of our ancestors and our families, which is lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. It's not only in our government here in the United States, but it's in the governments across the globe and across the country. It's the same crap, different day. This is the path. This is the path. This is a direct reflection of what's going on in society at this time. CIA operations, from Hollywood to female celebrity, to the Hollywood president, to the New York entrepreneur, to the witchcraft, to the social media influencer, and to corporate America globally. These people do not want this information exposed because they will be executed, they will be put in jail, all their money will be taken, and they will no longer have the power to get their nails and hair done. And for you to give up all your power to them, they will cry on the floor on a daily basis if they survive. They are so evil, they would rather punish you, give you cancer, look at you as they feed you fatty foods, hurt you on a daily basis, than be exposed and do the right thing. Now listen to me when I'm talking to you. You stay out of my space when I'm reporting factual news from Colonel Prouty, who is brave enough to write down all of his instances while he was alive and published the book, discussed the book, and even made a movie about the book. Put his ass on the line. His life was on the line, and that is a true hero. Back to the book. We're on page 118 if you're following along, if you can keep up. In times of peace, it would have been unthinkable for one nation to interfere openly in all internal affairs of another without some prior understanding of such occurrences, otherwise are met with disapproval from all over the world. It must be admitted at the present time such fine points are sometimes overlooked by various emergency reasons, but these are the exceptions and not the rule. Even in South Vietnam, where there was never been a really independent government, and where the United States, for all its sacrifices and assistance, might be expected quite understandably to have some rights. We find that the ambassador leans over backwards, at least in appearance, not to interfere in the internal affairs of that beleaguered nation, and that is rather extreme example. In the world familiar of nations, sovereignty is one of the key conditions of existence, and sovereignty is inviolate. Even if we walk about some small country such as Monaco or Luxembourg, the Code of Nations regards their sovereignty to be as precious as that of the United States or the USSR. The day this code breaks down will be the beginning of the end of the world order and of a return to the rule of brute force. In the world family of nations, sovereignty is one of the key conditions of existence, and sovereignty is inviolate. Even if we talk about some small countries such as Monaco or Luxembourg, the Code of Nations regards their sovereignty to be as precious as that of the United States or the USSR. The day this code breaks down will be the beginning of the end world order and of a return to the rule of brute force. Liberty becomes... I think Ukraine should be called out. Liberty begins as the aspiration of the individual, and sovereignty is the measure of the absolute power of a state. As we look around us today, we see an erosion of this fundamental of international society. It is for this reason that we must look into the situation and consider how important it is to the world community to uphold principles that we hold to be essential and priceless assets of our civilization. Since sovereignty is priceless and must be inviolate, it is fundamental that no nation has the right to do that which, if every other nation did likewise, would destroy this fragile fabric of civilization. We all agree in 99% of the cases that no nation has the right to infringe overtly upon the sovereignty of another. Since there is no higher court or other jurisdictional body empowerment as final and absolute arbiter over the nations of the world, judgments in such cases must be left to the honor that exists among nations. When this fails, the only other alternative is for all nations, large and small, to form power blocks and alliances that in one way or another result in dependence upon brute force and sufficient leverage to demand compliance with the doctrine of sovereignty. Such moves in themselves result in the sacrifice of some measure of sovereignty. The price of alliance is generally some form of agreement and limitation of sovereignty that binds each party to assist the other, even to the point of maintaining troops on the other soil or some other such measure. But for lack of other means, all nations must, in the final issue, seek their own security as best they can, and somewhere in this fabric, the common good directs that all nations honor and respect certain unassailable rights. Since no nation would then resort to overt infringement of sovereignty without being ready to face up to a war with the nations, perhaps a war of major proportions involving nations in alliance with that nation, the overt infringement is for all practical purposes out of the question. In all respects, overt violation of the sovereignty of one nation by another would be a more difficult decision to make than a covert or clandestine infringement of sovereignty. If one nation believes that it has so much at stake that it must infringe upon the sovereignty of another nation, it will resort to clandestine means as a lesser of two evils. Choosing a clandestine act leads to a rich dilemma. Either the operation will be successful and it will never be discovered, or it will fail and guilty nation may be found out. This information has already been found out. Just to let everybody know, whatever time you see this video, in the moment that I sit here in my chair, is everyone knows about it. However, everyone's pretending like they don't know about it, which is a complete out of integrity to fuel the out of integrities of those around them that are out of integrity. When you're actually of integrity, you just haven't learned what integrity means, because integrity as an action is a tough self-awareness game to play. And so even people that think they're going to hell because they had an affair or they did something stupid at work, it's like, that's not what this is about. That's lessons in your life of making bad choices and to recovering from that. This is demon activity, listening to the wolf as a regular way of living versus knowing God. Perfectly imperfect is a discussion of action, meaning there's always the possibility, when there's a glimmer of a light, to reform yourself, just like prison reform. However, some of these folks are so gone, they have no glimmer, and those are the ones you are afraid of, when there's nothing to be afraid of except for fear. I have battled the world. One human being, one person has battled them. Now imagine if a collective consciousness laughed in their faces, made them feel stupid because they deserve it, and not sat back and allowed them to teach you things like manipulation tactics to get more fans and followers. Because those are not the kind of fans and followers you want on your page anyways. They will not buy anything from you. They will only learn manipulative behaviors, and then the only people winning are the ones that have money and are stealing money from the rest of us for $1,000 monthly consulting fees when they do nothing but mind manipulate you. You've already been found out. You have already been found out. They are all watching your pages. Because we also have something called the FBI. We also have a side of the CIA, which is also a version of the perfect secret team, which I keep wanting to call it the perfect team. I don't know why, but I do. Let me finish this little bit of paragraph, and then I'm going to stop this video. And then realizing that such operations are directed and manned by human beings and that failure is inevitable, the NSC added a second most important stipulation to the effect that in the case of failure, the U.S. government must be able to disclaim plausibly any part in such an operation. These safeguards take none of the gravity away from the nature of the operation. They simply serve as a precautionary and stringent guidelines to remind the agency that clandestine operations directed by an agency of the U.S. government are serious business. Before I hang up, I want to talk about Iran and Ali and how he was at a women's rights discussion at a college within his country. Factual proof that he cares about women's rights. And the people that are fueling the removal of the hijab are just against the nation known as Iran. They're attempting to outthrow the government and replace it with one similar to the Biden administration, to the Taliban administration, to create global chaos where the rich become richer and the poor become poorer and you people become slaves. However, the people rioting and rallying to the street are, one, either brainwashed, two, they're instigators, or three, they're just plain psychotic. You must take a look at this as a political power move, meaning they have hired celebrity status individuals with millions of followers to be perpetrators against a country known as Iran because they don't want to work with Biden, Democratic Party. That is a grounds for execution. That is grounds for extraditing them out of this country. That is grounds for a whole lot of other stuff. And they sit back eating their diarrhea underwear, acting as if they know what they're doing, and all they do constantly is expose themselves. And I'm not talking about showing themselves. I'm talking about they are not intelligent. They think by having a beautiful face and a beautiful body, that's not true, by the way. It's flabby and it's skinny and it has no shape. That you will fall to their feet and bow down to them as if they are queens and kings, while they spew off toxic information, and you will not go against them because you are so kind. Kindness only works when you're working with kind. Kindness only works when you're working with kind. Otherwise, art of war. That is a missing point in anyone who's out there motivational speaking. A realization that has come to me based on my own level of kindness, which is 100% pure. So the next time that you're standing in front of some demon activity and you're operating amongst collusion amongst women, you better get ready to battle, because they will steal your business, they will steal your soul, at least attempt to, and they will laugh themselves all the way to the bank. And that is for Colorado Springs Baptiste Yoga, Tara Milliken, and the rest of her Ku Klux Klan.